This is another opportunity to give some love to some amazing people who've been on our podcast, and then just kind of more gratitude there as well.
Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll have one aha moment after another. There is an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that almost no one knows enough about yet. Yes, the negative noise is hiding this wave so well that we're calling it a conspiracy of goodness. It is still an amazing world out there, and we're going to be introducing you to some of the people making it that way. Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Ulrich, founder of the Goodness Exchange, the mothership website to this podcast and so much else that's going on to aggregate all the positive stuff, all the things that should be rising to the top of the news cycle that we could be celebrating. The purpose of the website and this podcast is to put a spring in your step again, help us all live with less fear and more joy, and we can get started with that right now. Today, we're going to meet Michael Shields, arts and culture editor, writer, podcaster, producer, and an arborist. Yeah, Michael is the podcaster in New York City who, like me, speaks to people who are doing amazing things all over the world. And every week he tells stories and talks to folks who are filling him with delight and all his very large audience. So Michael and I got together when I was on his podcast, and we decided to swap stories about 10 of our guests, 4 or 5 from each of us, that come to mind immediately when we think about ingenious ideas and helpful perspectives. This episode will feel like food for the soul because it is chock full of quick insights and 10 recommendations for places to go next if you want your hope in the future restored. Michael is the host of Beyond the Margins podcast, and he's founder of an online literary and culture magazine called Across the Margins. Whether he's interviewing others, musicians, activists, comedians, or whoever, authors, he interviews a lot of authors, he finds something remarkable in their notions and he brings it to light and then asks all the questions you and I would ask if we were sitting right there with a cup of coffee. I try to do the same myself. So it seemed like a great idea for Michael and I to cross-pollinate and try and help our audiences see an even bigger spectrum of what's going on in the world that's worth celebrating. The bottom line is this. Michael and I are seeing a world full of wonder and possibility and ideas that we want everyone else to see. And, don't stress about jotting down all the links we're going to give you, because both his podcast and mine will have terrific show notes and a link to every single thing we talk about. So just sit back, relax, or put some earbuds on and take a great walk and enjoy this episode for a reminder of the beauty and the wonder that is all around us. Welcome, Michael Shields.
Hi, good afternoon, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on your show, coming on my show. Thank you for letting me talk about my podcast and also to talk about your podcast. I'm excited.
Well, I tell you, we have to at least give folks some idea of how this thing all came about. I think I went back and tracked it. I was on your podcast because of the book I wrote, Happiness is an Option.
Absolutely. Yep. We did an episode fully dedicated to happiness as an option.
Yeah. And then I think that we just recognized we had so much in common. You with your love of the natural world and strange things like slime mold. Wasn't that our very...
Yeah. I mean, and also we saw a lot of comparisons within our podcast who we wanted to talk to and just kind of seeking out these people who are finding wonder in the world or just doing really fascinating things. And we were telling a lot of similar stories. And I think we both got excited about that.
Yeah, I think one day we spent like an hour and a half on the phone one time. I had a glass of wine in hand and we were just talking about each of the stories that it's a gift to be able to talk to all these people and really dig into some of these amazing ideas and some of these people who are just really changing the world or bringing ideas to the table that can change the world. I truly have a deep gratitude for this position that I'm in. I'm sure you're the same. Me too. And I mean, this is a real conversation. I want all of our listeners to know that this is not going to be like a steady interview that we prepared for ahead of time. Yeah, we're just really letting people in on a conversation that, like I said, we had one night way back, and here is the culmination.
Yes,
of it.
Absolutely. No, but it's gonna be fun. This is an opportunity. We're going to talk about both our podcasts a little bit, an opportunity to kind of give a window into your listeners and my listeners what happens, and just an idea of some of the stories and people you can come upon in this whole thing. And just I scroll through, your listing of who's been on your podcast, and it's just like, it's so exciting. It's really, really exciting, and hope people feel the same when they come to Across the Margin.
Yeah. And I'll say one last thing. I think that we both came away from that getting to know you conversation that went on so long that night. We felt validated. I know that that's how I felt. Like, I see wonder in the world all around me all day long. And all these people that were writing about the goodness exchange and the people, there's so much wonder that's going uncelebrated in the world.
Yeah. That's what's so special about your podcast, and hopefully both of our podcasts. But it's
true.
Yeah, it's really, and this is another opportunity to give some love to some amazing people who've been on our podcast, and then just kind of more gratitude there as well.
So we're kind of making this format up as we go. But what we decided ahead of time was that I could immediately look at the list of guests that you have, and I picked out a number of them that I'm super curious about. And so we just decided that I'll ask Michael about some of these folks and their notions, and then we'll switch roles and everybody will win.
Exactly. So we picked out about 4 podcasts, each of ours that we've done not too long ago, and we're going to discuss each one. So I think we'll start with Across the Margin, the podcast.
Okay. All right. Now, this one was part of our original conversation, if I remember right. You've got this great episode 92, that's titled Tree Beings. Talk to us about tree beings.
What was fun about that? That was the first and only, and hopefully not the last. It's not thing, but it is a children's book, and it was sent to me. It was Raymund Huber is the author. It was very great illustrated. It was illustrated wonderfully. I can't think of the illustrator's name right now. I apologize, but what was so interesting to me. I am an arborist, and so when that book was sent to me, it was just exciting to see. Not just, it's always fun picking up any book about trees. I read them all any chance I get, but it didn't talk down to kids, as I see often when it comes to like children's scientific books. I mean, it went in, it was going through the layers of the bark. It was doing, different ideas about trees. And I thought it was done in a way that like made it, something they can comprehend, but also was fun. It was tons of fun, but it was also, it is kind of, I'm glad you bring that episode up. It was kind of special to me because it was the first time I brought kind of my other work into the podcast. I've never ever done that. Everything has been always about the guest and everything like that. But it was the first time I talk about what I do when I'm not behind the computer, and that's being an arborist. And that's a big part of my life. And it was the first time I started talking about it. And that's something I've done moving forward. It's anytime it comes up, I talk to a couple guitar makers who wrote a wonderful book about trees and harvesting certain trees for guitars. And we were able to talk about it in a different level because of what I've done. And there's been other times now. So that was kind of opened the door for me to talk about another one of my passions in there. So that episode has a big piece of my heart.
And I think, I can't recall if it was before or after, but it was not that long ago with this whole concept of trees talking to each other.
Yeah.
Came up, and I remember you and I were...
That gets me so excited. I've known about that for a little while. Suzanne Simard, her studies have really brought it to life. Her book, The Mother Tree, is just absolutely outstanding. But there's science behind that. Because so many people have always looked to trees as their own being, kind of almost competing with each other, competing for light, competing for all the resources around, for water. And the thing is, just hearing that within tree communities, they're actually helping each other out. I think it's just like absolute game changer. And I think so many people, anyone I talk to about trees, it's really one of the first things they bring up. Everyone's really excited that trees are communicating. They're sending nutrients, all because of the fungus is involved, mycorrhizals involved. And it's one of the most beautiful things that I've learned about trees or in science. I just love it.
I cannot imagine how these kind of insights must have improved your way of thinking about the purpose for what you do as an arborist.
Yeah, definitely. It's always been so utilitarian, kind of what counting trees and what you can take from them. And it just kind of made me even think about how I want to approach my career and taking care of them and being more a nurturing tree doctor than someone who's out there kind of chopping down trees for money. I want to be out there to nurture them, and I kind of continue to shape my career to do that instead of doing the other thing. Because the more you learn about their wondrous ways, the more you want to care for them.
Well, and don't you think we're not just talking about an arborist or trees, right? I think there's like 100,000 foot look perspective here that's good for anybody's profession. Like that's what the importance of new ideas and new information and not just tuning out the news entirely, because you're going to miss the good news too that might pertain to your field. Imagine. Right? So that's, I think, why we've got to focus on innovation and we got to hear about what's happening. Because no matter what your field is, there's somebody out there pushing at the edges.
Exactly. And that's why websites like yours or just any sort of, we've both talked many times about curating your feeds and everything like that. Find places where you can find this information, and you're going to find things in other people's field that when they say what they do, you're like, oh my goodness, I heard about this. And, it's important to find ways to find that information that's exciting, that's positive, and it's going to change the way you look at the world, really.
Okay, so the next one that I wanted you to comment on demonstrates the scope of our conversation.
Yeah, we're going to bounce around. That's one thing, about Add Across the Margin, the podcast. Kind of just my goal is to talk to as many fascinating people as I can, whatever. If a great book comes my way, great. If a musician that I love reaches out, wants to talk, I'm going to talk to him. An activist, and it's an open door policy to fascinating people and ideas. But what's up next? What's the second one you want to talk about?
Okay, the second one was episode 125, The Other Dark Matter.
Yes.
Is it Lina or Lina?
It's Lina. Yep. Yes.
Okay.
So this is about poop. I'll put it bluntly. So her whole book really talks about what we can do with waste. And we're talking about human waste, and it's something we're talking about sewage. And it sounds like a pretty messy idea, but it was a beautiful, beautiful book. And because it was about, so often, on these interviews I do, we're talking about problems. And what Lina was talking about was solutions. And it was just, which was just so beautiful. It was a book full of, and it wasn't only what we can do with sewage. And the idea was it becomes a resource for renewable energy and just all of these different things that you can do with it. It wasn't about only what we can do with it. It was also what we are doing. She spoke to the District of Columbia is doing amazing things with their sewage. New York has some plants where they're fueling, well, a lot of, just for one example, they're fueling a lot of the trucks, the New York City trucks around here with biofuel that's made from the sewage around here. These ideas that we're going to need to do to make a more sustainable world is find ways to deal with our waste. And Lina really leaned into this. And I do want to mention this. I love how Lina leans into her specialty. Like, she owns it. Anytime you see pictures of her, she's wearing a poop emoji hat, and she doesn't find it. She grew up in a situation where her grandparents were farmers, and they were taking the sewage and putting it on the plants. So it's never been from the animals and putting it on the plants and using it in the garden. So it's never been gross to her. The idea has just never been gross to her. Sewage has always been life to her, and that's beautiful.
And it does show, I found in that interview, it caused me to ponder about what other things we think of as waste that could be this enormous resource. Again, if people are going to know within a few minutes of this podcast that I'm always thinking about the 100,000 foot look. I could not listen to that episode without thinking, gosh, what else are we just throwing away? Or
what other trash is our treasure, and there's so many things. And that's what's going to be so crucial. We have to figure out how to use these things that would often just be looked at as trash as some sort of valuable resource. And I'm sure someone has an idea for all these things that we throw away.
I think I have to say one more thing about that interview and her, and the way you're describing. She totally owns this field. Can we give people permission to be passionate?
About
Stuff that we don't understand ourselves, but have admiration instead of kind of thinking of, my family likes to call me the woman with the tinfoil hat.
You know what? I agree with that. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and there's a lot of, I see jokes about hipsters often. And when I think about like these people that are labeled hipsters, like there's jokes about things they'll do, and they'll like their love of great coffee, and they'll open up a coffee shop. And I just see passion there. Hipsters, they keep bees. I see like someone with a passion for beekeeping, and I'm just like, yeah, make fun of them all you want, but these are people finding things that they absolutely love and making a life from it. There's actually an episode I'm going to ask you when we turn the tables here, but that's about making your passion your life. And when I see people do that and own it like that, I just let your freak flag fly. It's beautiful.
Okay, so here's the next one.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got episode 92. I'm recommending, by the way, everything that we're talking about is going to be in the show notes at the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, and I'm sure yours too. So people don't have to go grab a pen.
Yep.
It's going to be there. So we've talked about episode 92, episode 125, The Other Dark Matter, and now I'm curious about episode 105, Up From Nothing, with John Hope Bryant.
John is a super inspirational person. Talk about really coming from nothing, from humble beginnings to becoming an advisor to multiple presidents. He's just, what he's done with his career, it's just one of the premier business leaders in all of Atlanta at this point. I mean, what he really focuses on, his book, it's a memoir / like self-help book. That book is called Up From Nothing, as you mentioned, but it focuses so much on positivity, on believing in yourself and optimism. One thing he really, really believes, and I think it's because he lived it, because kind of coming from nothing to just great successes, he believes anybody can be anything. I think for some people, it's surely more complicated than that. Some people come from some really, really tough spots, and just that idea could sound ludicrous to him, but he truly believes it. And he truly believes it. And that's what's inspiring. And that's why, when you hear him talk, you start getting filled up with, I guess I can do anything. He really sprays life out of him. And it was just a gift to speak to him about this, because it's not an act. He really, truly believes that positive thinking and these type of optimism and finding ways to really believe in yourself is going to propel you to greatness. It's really inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. And I think positivity has gone through waves in the last 3 years. They're like, I remember the first time someone asked me about toxic positivity.
Yeah.
What?
How dare you put those words together?
I don't know. I know I totally get it. And
yeah.
There is no end to the fakery.
Absolutely.
In the world of people trying to influence us to buy their thing or to invite them to speak at our thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And certainly people have sucked old positivity right into that whole
Definitely
not much rigorous intention zone. But I think that somebody like this, who's lived a life of rigorous intention, who's sharing their lived experience with us, this is what podcasts like yours and mine are for, really.
Absolutely.
Is to not have to go through it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I'll speak to about him. One thing in the book, I'm not sure I can think of all the pillars, but he has 5 pillars of successes in there. I think one starts with learning as much as you can, education. I know family is one. He really, really talks a lot about family and leaning on them, but self-esteem, as I mentioned. But there's one of those pillars is finding role models. He knows you can't do it alone. Seek out people that can maybe teach you something or walk you through something. And I was surprised to see that when you see 5 pillars or something, you don't see role models, but he sees it as something, he speaks to the actual specific people in his life in the book that really meant something to him. And I guess what he was saying is I couldn't do it alone. And, most of the time you can't.
No, one of the best things I've noticed over the 10 years of curating the internet like we do for Goodness and Progress is that I've decided that people succeed in groups.
Yeah.
Behind every Nobel Prize winner is probably 100 really tired people.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
Absolutely.
This is the way it's going to go going forward. We're going to get out of this dark time, but nobody's going to lead us forward alone.
Absolutely. We're going to do it together, or we're not going to do it. Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
John is definitely super, super inspirational.
And then I think that kind of leads into probably some curiosity that I had about this episode 100.
Ah,
How to
one of my
do
favorites.
nothing.
Yep. It's
How to
truly,
do nothing with
truly.
Jenny Odell.
It's truly one of my favorites. I honestly, and I'm holding up the book right now. I keep by my desk and just to pick it up from time to time and kind of touch base with it and get some of these ideas. And it literally changed how I kind of see and hear the world. It's really about fighting this idea of choosing where your attention goes. That's really the idea. That she has a term she used, resistance in place, which I thought was a great term. It's about not allowing kind of technology and kind of capitalistic value systems to define our self-worth and choosing, kind of where to put our attention and how much power our attention has. It's what I think a quote was in it: attention might be the last resource we have to withdraw. Like, hold your attention back and choose what to do with it. It's also, it's about kind of a backlash to technology, but there's a lot of nature in the book. She talks about bird watching again. Another idea in it that she speaks a lot is about bioregionalism. And that's kind of truly knowing the environment around you, whether it's here in New York. And the more you know, the more you pay attention, the more you get from that. Walking down the street, if you silence yourself and listen, you're going to start hearing different bird calls. And then the more you hear that, it builds on itself and you start hearing your environment more. The book kind of calls me to, I run a lot and I always listen to music or I listen to podcasts. When I started reading the book, I started running through it. I live near a beautiful park. I started running through the park without it. And I'm like, I'm missing out. There's so much to take in that's already there. And the more this bioregionalism idea, the more you kind of know the environment around you, the more you care about it. You become invested in the health of the place because you care about it, you know about it. It's really, the book really speaks to the rewards of habitually noticing things and just being aware. And it's incredible. I honestly don't know if I've recommended a book more. It was really just such a joy to talk to Jenny, and I couldn't recommend the book more. It's awesome. And if you want to learn more about it, the episode's great. She really really breaks down all these ideas. There's even like a whole bunch of other fun concept ideas that she, puts a label on, and it's beautiful.
Can you refresh my memory about why her? What's the through line? Why did she write this book?
Oh, I'm not. I think that's a great question. It also comes back to, I think she started with her noticing. It starts out with like her noticing a bird out like her window. And then she started seeing that, like, what the life of that bird was. And then she started looking around and it was just everything built from just kind of noticing something out her window, if I'm correct about that. I know it's funny. It made me almost interested in bird watching by the end of the book. There was something to it, but just noticing life around you in a different way. It was really, I actually read it during kind of like the heart of lockdown. And like, I was just walking through the park and it was a lot quieter at that time too. And just hearing, like I said, I was hearing the world differently after reading the book. And I think there was a point too, where she talked about it. She went to a symphony and it just like kind of like shook her. Like she started hearing things. She walked out of that symphony and she just like was walking down the street listening and her ears were just in tune differently. And I completely get that. I've had musical experiences like that. I've had quiet movie experiences like that where I walked out and my ears were just almost like super ears and I was just hearing the world differently. And it's pretty special.
That reminds me of an episode I just recorded. By the time this airs, that one will be up with a videographer named Liz McKenzie, who was the videographer for this incredible documentary, all related to the sounds of nature and what we're missing. And one of the things that the guy that narrates, and he's arguably the focus outside of listening to nature, the focus of the documentary is that she says something like, it's like we've lost the ability to hear our world's greatest philosophers.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That is definitely, that's almost something that can come out of Jenny's book. That's amazing. That's your next episode. That's great.
Yeah. Liz McKenzie. I recommend people. So this is something that you and I hope to do every so often now for our podcast audiences, is just exchange this kind of wonder. Thank you so much for sharing
Absolutely. No, and I'm excited. Let's turn those tables right now to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm a fan. I'm glad that your book fell into my world, because then it led me to your website, led me to your podcast, the whole thing. So, and there's just so much wonder and so much to sift through and find. I mean, this is not one that I'd mentioned that we were going to talk about, but when I, opened my podcast page this morning, there was one with Streets Are for the People with Blaine Merker. Is it your most recent one? I'm telling you, my favorite thing, like we mentioned earlier, how we curate your feeds to see things that make you happy. Like, one of my favorite things on Twitter is a couple accounts that I follow that is about reclamation of streets. It shows old pictures in Amsterdam where there was cars and stuff, and like now it's like people. And I've almost become obsessed with the idea of what streets can be. They don't have to be this. And just, it happened around here in New York during the pandemic, where they allowed all these restaurants to reclaim the parking spots, and thank goodness they let them keep that. But just the idea of reclaiming streets is beautiful. I think he talks about, and I just love this, what makes us happiest are things that are carbon neutral. It's about people, relationships, meaning that episode was really special. So that thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to learning more about Blaine too.
So I will talk about that, just because I want people to understand that a lot of times I'm referring to, and Michael just did refer to, articles on the Goodness Exchange as well, because I came by Blaine Merker's work because we wrote an article about this company that he's working with called GAL. It's a big global company that is fixing what happened with our urban environments in the last 70 years. Because I mean, that's the gist of it. In the last 70 years, we made all of our urban environments, and for that matter, suburban environments, for cars and not people.
Absolutely. Exactly. We made it for the industry, and just like, look at all these, the percentage, and I think he brings it up, of paved land that are just all these giant parking lots that are like, it's unbelievable. It wasn't for us. It wasn't for people, which is wild.
And you mentioned about what happened during the pandemic. The great thing about that is he tells this great story. I do believe, I could be wrong, but I think he was his first company was at the heart of this parklet movement. Do you remember? Yes. Yes. He was the guy. It was he and his co-owner that said one day, you know what? When you put 25 cents in a parking meter, you own that space for 2 hours, and you can do whatever you want in it. You can park your car in it, but you can also, and what they did, set up a little mini park in the, and then as researchers, they watched what happened, and people used it.
That's amazing.
So
the idea that you can really, like, I just feel like often you get stuck in the idea of this is the way it is. And I just love to think about the idea that it doesn't have to be this way. And we think reanalyzing our priorities and what we need to do. And there's thinkers like Blaine out there who are really doing it in a major, major way. So one of the episodes that I was excited to talk to you about, I think it was just prior to that. It's a real recent one. Is with Dr. Hal Urban. And it really spoke to the power of positivity. And I think I feel like we both have a bunch of podcasts, and Dr. John Hope Ryan was another one where it really speak to perspective and finding ways to look at what you have and not what you have. But I was curious if you could speak about that episode some and tell us what you learned from Dr. Urban.
We titled it funny because that's kind of the 100,000th look.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm going to look over here, because I want to make sure I don't leave anything out on these episodes.
Right, yep.
Do you know what I like most about you and other ways to make life happier?
That okay. I was going to mention that, the idea of the language changes that you go. Please tell us about that.
Okay, so Hal is this amazing guy who was an award-winning high school teacher, like so many awards you can't even start talking about him, in California for 36 years. And he was also an adjunct professor at a very nice college institution in his region too. And he has just always been one of those people who recognized right from the get-go that children perform better if you find some way to positively influence their surroundings. They do not do their best if you aren't providing the right culture for them to do their best.
Yeah.
And And so he's really lovely about saying when he had it wrong and then what happened. And almost everything he ever learned, he learned from a kid.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. The kids would point out that he was being hypocritical, or they would point out his biases. He's so full of stories about how he really learned about the power of positivity from children.
Yeah, that's so cool. And just, to speak to the title of the episode, it was talking about how he would kind of walk and meet somebody instead of like, how are you? That's exactly what he would say. He's like, you know what I like about you? That's how he would open it. And it changes the whole conversation. It changes the whole relationship and how they approach each other. And I just thought that was so cool.
And how many times have we think about all the people that are really important in your life, Michael, and our listeners here? Mm-hmm. Have you ever said to them, do you know what I like most about you?
Yeah.
No, yeah. I don't know if I've ever said that to my own children, much less I think I've said it to my husband before because he's such a funny guy. And he keeps me going with humor. But how often do we actually say that to the people in our workplaces that we really count on? Or do you know what I like most about you? So this Hal Urban episode is full of little nuances. Like you mentioned, the greeting thing. When someone says to Hal, he works out every day. When he's going to the gym and says, somebody, how are you today, Hal? He says, well, I am so much better for having accidentally bumped into you.
Oh, see? Really? These are day makers. And just think about how are you just kind of rings hollow at this point. And just if you have something else and you bring something positive and unexpected to the table like that, it really can change someone's day.
He talks about this great exercise. My husband and I actually did it the night after I interviewed Hal about training yourself to stop complaining.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That's
I think of myself as a really positive person. But when my husband got home that night, we said, okay, let's cook dinner. And we were cooking together. Let's see how long we can go without complaining. Because my husband and I are both dentists. And so we have this shared business in this big dental practice. And, it's got all the things that all business, the world is so unpredictable now. And boy, that was an exercise.
Yeah, I bet I consider myself, an optimist as well. And I bet they'd be surprised how much I complain too. And that's interesting to kind of put your feet to the fire on that one. That's really good. What you come upon so often in the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast are just these unbelievable life-changing stories that some of these, some of your guests have had. And one of them that's just absolutely mind-blowing that I want to point to is turning pain into a teacher with Stephanie Schaefer. That episode is unbelievable. I mean, what she went through and what she turned it into is as inspiring as a story I came upon. Can you tell us a little bit about, Stephanie's story?
Yeah. So Stephanie, I actually have 2 interviews with her. I think it's in the first 10 episodes. If people go way back in our archives, we'll put it in the show notes. And there's a reason why I'm mentioning that. So Stephanie is this 26-year-old gal who was a 22-year-old college student, spring break soccer player, doing all the things, going out every Saturday night with her buddies, all that, full form. And she went on a spring break vacation with her family. And what are we going to do today? Her sister chose to go. They were somewhere in the Caribbean where you could go swim with pigs.
Yeah.
That would say you get on a boat and you just shoot off and you go to an island and you swim with pigs. And her mother is quite a savvy woman, and she did her homework because there's lots of tour operators. Yeah. She picked the best one.
Wow.
And gosh darn it, is that boat didn't take off from that pier that day. And she had very carefully chosen her seat on the boat. It was like, 9, 10, 11, 12 people on the boat because she wanted to get a great tan. I mean, she is so forthcoming about the why through this whole story. And the boat took off, and about 100 yards from shore, it blew up. And it blew up underneath the seat she was sitting on. And the story is so compelling. I get goosebumps just thinking about it here. There was a death in the boat that her mom was involved in. Meanwhile, the long and short of it is she lost both of her legs. And then now she's this 22-year-old beautiful woman who has lost her legs, and she has a million other injuries as well. Mm-hmm. They tell her that her injuries are consistent with what you would look like in war, the kind of injuries they see in war.
Yeah.
And you know what? there's a lot of that goes on in this interview and what's happened in her life, but she ends up modeling for the Kardashians in the first photo shoot of folks with disabilities. And I tell you, the insights she shares through telling that story in the bits and parts, it is one of those things many of those insights you can't unhear.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the perseverance and it's just amazing. I mean, she speaks so, eloquently about giving attention to your gains and not your losses. And I mean, this is someone whose losses, a lot of people, and I don't know how I would bounce back from something like that. And just perspective comes up a lot. I feel like when you're in the depths of Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, and she found a way to force her perspective towards what she had instead of what she didn't have anymore. And it's just that drove her, which is amazing. And there's all these little tidbits that she talks about that you can walk away with. And because she talks about being kinder than you need to be. And I always like thinking about that. I love that idea of it just bringing ultra kindness to the table in situations where it just doesn't, have to be there or belong, and how that can really change a situation. So not only was their story so inspiring and just a tale of perseverance and looking at the positive, but there's so many life lessons that she can bequeath us with because of what she went through. It's really, both of those episodes are stunning.
Yeah. And the original episode I'll refer people to, I was a changed woman after that one. We weren't recording in video then, so it's only audio. But I had the feeling I was talking to someone sort of otherworldly because she was then only 2 years out.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
She was saying things that, should take a lifetime.
So fresh. Yeah.
Yes, she was saying things that should take a lifetime to come to. But so anyway, yes, those are really good interviews. Bring a smile to your face. It really
so inspiring. So I often talk to I've talked to a lot of climate change journalists on just really outstanding climate minds on Across the Margin of the podcast. So I was really drawn into one of your episodes called "The One Big Problem We Need to Know How to Solve" with I think it's Christoph Gorder.
Yeah.
It's called Charity Water. And so it's all about water, which, I mean, the more we learn about just water becoming this resource and just what it means to regions and just how there's water refugees now. I hate to be negative here, but I can imagine there's going to be skirmishes between countries over it. It's just such a big, big thing. And just that was the different things you guys got into about water was just the scale was huge that you guys got into. But tell us a little bit about that episode.
Okay. Christoph has this amazing background, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the main thing I loved about that interview is, so the whole thing at the Goodness Exchange and the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast is that we are focused on solution. I know the world is a harsh, horrific place. Mm-hmm. And there are so many people who are built perfectly to cover that part of the story and the equation more than me. I think if I had to tell about the problems of the world very much, I'd just be walking around sobbing all the time. I just wouldn't be an effective communicator. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So we are focusing on solutions. Okay. Christoph Gorder said the most extraordinary, funny little thing, which in hindsight, he goes, Linda, water is one problem we know how to solve right now.
Wow.
Across the world. Wow. Yeah, that is so, of all the problems in the world that we don't know how to solve or that we're struggling with, we know how to solve the problem of water.
Wow. That's amazing.
Whether we're doing it.
And also his charity, whether we're doing it or not, that's a whole other story. His charity has raised more than 600 million and has provided clean water to over 15 million people. That is just outrageous.
Okay, so the gist of what's going on here is that also you should know Charity Water is one of the most important, I would say the most well thought of charities in the world because of the way their donors stay on board and they stay engaged. This is in the nonprofit world. That's Charity Water's big thing. People in the nonprofit world, they're like the gold standard of how you keep people giving and engaged. And it was clear to see after 10 minutes talking to Christoph, I knew why. Because if they have more people like him in that organization that actually communicate the story, the message, the possibility, the opportunity, there's no way. I quickly signed a donation form myself afterwards.
Well, he also speaks to how the huge differences that small contributions can make, and so it's also inviting people that sometimes feel like, well, what is this going to do? What is this small thing? And he's like, a lot. It adds up, and it does a lot, and that was really cool to hear from someone who's raised so much money.
And that's what moved me to take care of this need right after. It wasn't that he's a good salesman.
Yeah.
It was that he made me feel like I could make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
The numbers that he gives about this organization. And then there's just he's such a great storyteller. He grew up in the African Republic and Nigeria, the Central Republic of
Central African
Republic. I'm not sure what it's called now.
Yeah.
But in Nigeria. So he has lived and he was the son of Lutheran ministers, I think. Yeah. So he has, he comes from the right background to just be like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it well and it's possible and let's just get to it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's a wonderful interview. If people just want to have hope that there are incredible organizations doing amazing work, listen to the one with Christoph.
Yeah, the scope is big too. You talk about the connection with climate change and scarcity of water, even like clean water and the war in Ukraine. There's just, you really touch on a lot, which is unbelievable. The last one I want to bring up is, I love this one because I always love the idea of, chasing your dream. And it's always, sometimes I'm sure we all run into people who are like, I want to do this. And you want to be like, just go, but we understand the risk of it. But it's so beautiful, and we love these stories when someone chases your dream and make it happen. But this episode, this is what it's all about. It's make a living or make a difference. You don't have to choose with Rashawn Paul. And this is all about building a career out of what you love. And I mean, isn't that the dream? And so this is another, completely inspiring case. And it also speaks to solutions as well. This is someone who's really helping people accelerate their careers towards, if they want to be social impact or whatever they want to do. I mean, he's helped 10,000 people plus kind of chase their dreams. And that's really, really cool stuff.
Oh, yeah. And I got to tell you, okay, so the book that he's written, he would be a great interview for you. It's called New Reason to Work. How to Build a Career That Will Change the World. That's the title and subtitle. And I tell you, it's right down the line on what Rashawn is best at. So in his story, I met him at an ideas conference called PopTech. I think PopTech was kind of the original TED before TED was a thing. And PopTech is an amazing ideas conference. And he was there representing this group that he started called the Amani Institute. So what he recognized when he came out of college, he has an amazing educational pedigree. Whoa, Nelly.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He has done the rigorous intention on getting an education. But what he noticed was that there are all these people in the world who wanted to change the world. He's from that generation who think they can. But where colleges were educating people and what the working world wanted were just going like
not aligning. Yeah.
And it takes a unique skill set to be a social entrepreneur, to start a startup that has social implications for the good, or to just be the CEO of a nonprofit or whatever. Almost everyone that he knew in this world that he was interested in wanted to change the world. But how do you do it? So he started this institute called the Amani Institute with a co-founder, and they did amazing work for 16 years. And I was talking to him about this concept of, do we have to do one or the other? Do we have to just work for the man and then earn money and then say one day I will? Or can you do it both? So I can highly recommend Rashawn Paul's TED Talk because he gets real about it there. Yeah, and make sure that we understand what it takes to make social change, and how the level of commitment that you have to have past the normal requests in life. But he puts it in such a beautiful way. So in that podcast, we talk about how the coolest people are impact first focused. And I think that interview will make you feel good about that there is a world and there is a pipeline of leaders that are getting the right education.
a lot of good tidbits about creative problem solving as well. Like he breaks it down. It's not just big scope things. It's really just, ideas about asking more questions, advocating for yourself, and immerse yourself in understanding what is going on and stuff like that. It was really little gems of knowledge that can really just, once applied, can change things in your life, in your everyday.
That book is like that. It's very, the book is very, if you need to fix this problem, there's going to be a chapter on like that. Like you ask better questions and then do this and then do this. It really takes you deeper and deeper into ways that start out pretty fundamental. Like ask a different question than you've ever asked. How many times do we go round and round in circles?
Definitely.
But I think also his book really, we talked a lot. That was at the beginning of the Great Resignation, the great, whatever we're calling it.
Yeah.
And I think that book really brings to life all the choices we have. It's not just quit and go save the rhinoceros. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just want to say to listeners across the margin of the podcast that these are just a few. This is the tip of the iceberg of stories and just amazing ideas and knowledge that you can gain, that you can find at the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. It's just, this is 4 of many, many, many podcasts that are there, and check it out. And I can't. I'm gonna stay. I'm a fan, and I'm gonna stay listening. It's just I learned a lot each and every episode.
Well, me too, about Across the Margins podcast. Yesterday, I had this extraordinary journey. I thought I was flying from Vermont, where I live, to Illinois, and I thought I would be there in 4 hours, best laid plans. And I got to tell you, my whole entire day, because it became planes, trains, and automobiles, I was listening to various podcasts of yours. And there's something about caring about things past the first soundbite. That Michael Shields is doing on Across the Margins. Can we get back to some long form things?
Absolutely. What's the story? What's the story behind the story? How'd you bring this to life? It's even when I'm like talking to musicians, like getting really deep behind. We hear the songs, but then you hear the story behind it, and that song becomes more impactful. And there's a story behind the storyteller's story. And that's what we're digging into over there. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
This was tons of fun. I can't, I know we have plans to do this again, and just to say thank you. We're both here saying thank you to all the guests on our shows for, not only spending time with us and the thoughtful answers, but just teaching us about the world and teaching us about the wonders of it. So let's definitely do this again.
That's right. And let's use one of your guests' insights and choose what we give our attention to, because what we give our attention to expands.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael Shields.
Of course. Thank you, Linda.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.